and it is kind of a personal story for me. That's me. You know that by now. I'm Davey. I've gone back and forth between freelancing and having real jobs ever since I turned 16, and arguably even earlier than that. So freelancing. Be your own boss. Sleep until noon. Work from home. In pajamas and slippers. Right? Sometimes I wear slippers. But why would you really want to do this? Like having a job is nice and stable. So I'm going to tell you about somebody else's story first. There was an interview that was published the day before I gave this for the first time, and it was just perfect. I liked it so much. This is Jeffrey Zeldman. Zeldman is one of the best-known web designers in the world, and a big part of the reason that browser makers started actually implementing standards like CSS and standard versions of HTML and JavaScript and the DOM, because I talked about the browser wars some on the very first days, and Netscape and Internet Explorer at one time were just kept doing completely different things, taking the web in different directions. Nothing worked everywhere, and it just sucked. And this guy managed to actually talk Microsoft of all places into adopting standards, with some help from others. But it was great. So he's a pretty cool dude. And he worked in advertising before striking out on his own to do web design full-time back in the late 90s. It's a pretty good story. He made the website for the movie Batman Forever, which was one of the first websites. Terrible movie, but one of the first websites to do a lot of techniques that now still seem pretty elementary, but were mind-blowing at the time. So he worked in advertising before he did that, and here's how he described it. I was working as a creative director at a New York startup in 1999. Despite my title, I felt powerless to affect the company's product or even control our design and code. I just wanted to design simple websites that mattered and charge a fair price for my work. So I quit. You probably haven't had enough jobs yet for this to really resonate. My last job, other than what I'm doing now, obviously, was as an enterprise software manager and project manager for a very large organization, 40,000 employees, over 1,000 IT staff. I was managing a big, important project and managing the developers responsible for implementing it. But I was powerless. Despite my fancy title, I was not empowered to make any decisions that actually affected the outcome. The real decisions were being made by people who made 3 or 4 times what I did and would probably never lay eyes on the finished product. That's an incredibly frustrating position to be in. The people making the actual decisions don't have to live with their decisions, and they never even bother talking to the people who will. It's a horrible feeling. So I quit. Zeldman continues, I spent too many of my formative creative years complaining about the decisions made by the people who paid my salary. It was time to stop complaining and start creating. So, kind of reason number 1 to strike out on your own, freedom. You can choose what projects you work on, assuming you have enough business to be choosy. But that's the goal. Get enough work that you can choose your clients and your projects. And maybe better yet, choose how you approach those projects. Because another really frustrating thing about working in some organizations is you have someone not only telling you what to do, but exactly how you should do it. Like they can't bear for you to do it a different way than they would. Or maybe they actually have no idea how to do what you do every day, but they still feel like they need to tell you exactly how to do it, and that's super frustrating. And as a consultant, generally it's not that way. And if it is, you fire that client. So another reason besides freedom, flexibility. This can be as simple as need to schedule a dentist appointment, make it for whatever time you want. Now, I'm probably still going to make it for first thing in the morning so that it doesn't interrupt my day, but you don't have to worry a whole lot about exactly when it is. If you have to take your cat to the vet or your dog at a moment's notice, just do it. to make sure you're where people expect you to be at when they expect you to be there. But just flexibility like that is huge. Yeah, just do it. Just take them to the vet. You don't have to beg somebody. Variety. Find it boring to work on a single project year after year? As a freelancer, you don't have to be stuck on the same thing forever. You essentially can change jobs, every 6 months, every year, whatever, which may sound horrifying to you. It's really, truly not for everyone. But for some people, like the thought of working on the same thing for a really long period of time, even though that was the model of work for 100 years or so, bores them to tears. My business partner, Miles, once said, I don't like anybody else's idea enough to work on it for more than 2 years. I'm not sure I feel quite that way, because I have done it for more than 2 years a couple of times. But I certainly understand the sentiment. So, presumably you're here because you're interested in coding. I hope so. Using your wits and creativity to build products and solve interesting problems. How do you feel about sales and marketing? Is that what you got into this for? Do you like those? If you strike out on your own and you don't do those things, there won't be any of that more interesting work to do. How about bookkeeping? Sound like a blast? You love spreadsheets? You love balancing your checking account? You got to do it if you're out on your own. No one's going to do it for you unless you pay them, and then you have to work even more to pay those people to do it. How about management? Is a middle manager what you've always wanted to be? If you start even a small agency, as Miles and I did, expect to spend some time on management tasks, even while you're still spending full time writing actual code. Did you always want to be a therapist? Is that what you got into computer science for? I didn't, but guess what? Every once in a while, I'm a therapist. Not just because I'm a manager, and all managers are therapists sometimes, but because sometimes I'm a therapist for my clients. They bring you in to help you solve some problem. And sometimes, they will pay you by the hour to sit there while they spill their guts and talk about, how much trouble they had with their previous consultant or whatever. I had a client who would go on and on about having been burned by developers before and how he just didn't trust developers. Developers just weren't trustworthy people. Why are you telling me this? Moreover, why are you paying me so much to listen to this? But that's okay. I was very understanding. I nodded. It was a video chat, but I nodded. I tried my best to understand. Many of my favorite people in the world are developers, but anyway. Do you love attending networking events? Do you love schmoozing? Do you love sitting there and listening to people self-promote? Well, again, if you're a freelancer, you kind of have no choice because that's how you meet people. Yeah, if you were wondering which of those three people I'm saying is the developer, guess. The one who doesn't make eye contact, right? So, yeah, you might be surprised by how much time you have to spend doing things other than whatever service it is you're selling as a freelancer. Maybe you actually enjoy some of that stuff. Some people do. Some people like not just the variety of projects to work on, but the variety of actual work to do. Sometimes I'm coding. Sometimes I'm managing. Sometimes I'm dealing with spreadsheets with dollar amounts in them. Sometimes I'm figuring out how much commission to give to my salesperson. By the way, my very least favorite part of my job, because it's really complicated to figure out. Maybe you like that stuff, or maybe it's simply worth suffering through it in order to have that level of freedom. But when are you going to do all that stuff? You need to spend enough of your time doing billable work that you can pay the bills. I don't understand this picture, but it was a Google image search results for something that I'm talking about. I don't even remember what it was. But if you time management maybe. But if you neglect those other things like the bookkeeping and the sales and the marketing and the networking, you won't have any new billable work when you get done with what you're working on now. So if you are super busy, you have work lined up for a really long time, it may feel like you don't need to be out doing those things right now because you're good. But then when that runs out, if you didn't spend some of your time doing sales when you already had work, guess what? You suddenly don't have work anymore. So you have to do it all the time. So it's very easy when you don't have traditional hours, when you have all that flexibility, and you're ultimately working for yourself, it's very easy to just work all the time. Maybe you like working all the time. Maybe you just have to find the discipline to force yourself to do it. Or maybe you just figure out a way that it doesn't end up that way. But the temptation will always be there. So you have to kind of work really hard to keep yourself from working all night. So if I scared you away, are you running straight to the nearest cubicle farm to collect your steady paycheck? Because really, there are very real advantages to so-called real jobs. Number one, stability. Truly, stability is the biggest advantage of a traditional job, depending on the job. If you work for, say, Salesforce, you can be pretty sure that your paycheck will arrive on time for the amount that you expect week after week. They could still decide to fire you or something, but you're not going to have the kind of instability where you're like not sure whether payroll is going to clear. And working for a startup, sometimes that's the case. And if you're working for yourself, even if you do the work, like you have to do collections. Who on earth wants to be a collection agency? Well, it's part of my job because I not only have to make sure that I remember to bill them, but I have to make sure that they actually pay when they're supposed to pay. And gosh, that's an unpleasant job. Even though most of our clients give us no trouble, sometimes they forget. Sometimes I forget to even send them an invoice when I'm supposed to because I'm not the only one doing the work. Don't have to worry about any of that stuff with a real job. And if you work for a stable company or an enterprise, payroll is going to clear. Another huge one, maybe the biggest one these days, benefits. Those kinds of jobs come with benefits beyond a steady paycheck. Paid time off, insurance, stuff like that. Those things are huge. You kind of have to be out of your mind to choose freelancing if a steady job is an option, let's face it. I have some sort of brain disease that makes me say, ah. So suppose you share my disease and you're interested in trying to strike out on your own. Where do you even start? How do you know if you're ready? I don't have all the answers. I certainly don't have any business telling you what's right for you, but I can tell you my story and how I ended up doing this reasonably successfully, because I did it unsuccessfully several times before I ended up here. Come back with me on a magical journey to 1992. Or so, 1992 or so. I don't really remember when I started doing this. But sometime in the early 90s, I started mowing lawns for money, like a lot of other adolescents, including Seth. And Seth got a lot more serious about it than I did. But that, I guess, was my first freelancing experience. And I used that money to buy a computer because my family didn't have one. So a couple of years later, a couple of years after I'd had my computer, I got my first modem. Yeah, my first computer didn't even have any way to talk to other computers. No networking, no modem, no nothing. So I got a modem sometime around 94. So now my computer could talk to other computers. I was mostly interested in using it to play Doom with my friends, one-on-one, by dialing each other directly. Like I would actually dial my friend's phone number and we would play Doom. But I also tried CompuServe and Prodigy and America Online. People weren't calling it AOL yet. So I got my first email address and all that. But at the time, those services didn't include internet access. You only had access to the walled garden that like Prodigy or America Online provided. No real internet access. So after about 1 million free trials of AOL, that was a neat trick. You could always just call to cancel at the end of your 30 free days and be like, I don't think so. And they're like, what if we give you another 30 free days? Well, okay. And you could do it forever. It was amazing. So every once in a while, you would have to actually cancel. But then you just go to the huge pile of AOL floppies that you'd gotten in the mail, because they sent them constantly. And eventually they were CDs. And then you could make like art out of them, out of all your AOL CDs. And if you didn't care too much about your microwave or your safety, you could throw them in the microwave, and it made kind of a really cool pattern. It might also explode, but it made a really cool pattern on the CDs. Don't do this, kids. Can't throw Spotify in the microwave. But after about 1 million free trials of AOL, I finally got real internet access in 96. I even paid for a second phone line in the house out of my lawn mowing money, so that there were no more conflicts over tying up the phone line. There was nothing more excruciating than like downloading an enormous file, probably a Doom level, over dial-up, and my gosh darn sister picks up the freaking phone. Like, no! Because there was no way to resume where you left off. You have to start over from the very first byte. Oh, it was awful. I still remember some specific instances of that just, oh my gosh, the heartbreak. First world problems. So a couple months after I got real internet access, I started my first web design company with 2 of my classmates. Like, truly, I got on the internet for the first time. A couple months later, I was like, I'm a web designer. Give me money, folks. So yeah, a couple of my dumb high school buddies and I started a company. It sounded better than Wendy's. We were called Web Exposure because the name was available. We got a business license and a pirated copy of Photoshop, and went and asked people for money. And astonishingly, someone gave it to us. We got a client. And as it turns out, like, of the 3 of us, I was the only one who was actually interested in learning how to do the work. So ultimately, that didn't work out very well, and that ended up being our only client. But we did get paid for that. And hey, guess where I ended up? Wendy's, making some French fries. But I only did that for about 6 months. And then I convinced my parents to let me quit the fast food game and do solo web design. Now I was Star Image Web Design. Again, because the name was available. And I made myself a cool swooshy logo, just like every single other company in 1997. And again, I got one very small client while I was still in high school, but that was enough to replace quite a few weeks of making $5.15 an hour in fast food. I wish I remembered how I got that client, but I don't. I remember being told no an awful lot, but I don't remember landing that first client. I certainly made it very low risk for them. It was a few $100, which was a ton to me, but not very much to them. And they had no web presence at all. So at worst, they went from having no website to having kind of a crappy one made by a high schooler. But then again, the handful of local businesses that did have websites had websites that looked like they were made by a child. So, you know, they were in line with the competition. And when I did try to sell to local businesses at that time, and as you might guess, I was a terrible salesperson, the biggest challenge wasn't convincing them that I should be the one to make the website. The challenge was convincing them that they should bother having a website at all. Like, people still, I started doing this early enough that like people were like, well, why would I want to be on the internet? That just seems like a waste of time. Like, it's hard to imagine now like anyone thinking that. But it was a hard sell, just having a website at all at that time. In '98, I graduated from high school and spent the summer working for the YMCA and playing in a band and practicing constantly and endlessly redesigning my own website. I had no clients at this time, but so I just kept redesigning my own website. So if you have nothing else to work on your own crap, and that's how you get better. So I started college and kept doing freelance web design instead of getting a campus job. That lasted through the spring and summer after my freshman year. At that point, I had several slightly bigger clients, like $1,000 or more, plus maybe a few bucks a month for hosting. I was really determined to avoid getting a real job. Again, something's wrong with me. It would have been so much easier. And I do remember how I got some of those clients. They were mostly people with whom I had some sort of personal connection. For example, I had a friend whose dad ran a bank. And that bank had no website. So I made a website for that bank. I showed you a screenshot of it on the first day, actually as part of my the history of JavaScript presentation. My family knew some folks who owned a huge biosolids business. Anybody know what biosolids are? It is poop, yes. This time I really am talking about poop. So everyone, I only know of one biosolids business, but every once in a while you'll see, now you'll maybe start noticing, Merrill Brothers, you'll see these huge tankers driving down the highway with the Merrill Brothers logo on the side. That's not gasoline, folks. That's crap. So I made their first website. And this also makes an interesting point. It's good to make connections with people, like not because you can use them later, but it does work out that way sometimes. That an awful lot of the jobs I get to this day are just because of people we know and are nice to, and who just generally have an opinion of us as a competent person. That can be enough to get your foot in the door to at least have that conversation about whether you should do some work for them. So it's a good rule for living anyway, but be nice to people, be a decent human being. I think that's something that TechPoint also harps on to you. But seriously, for realsies. So we're still in 1999. When school started back up in the fall, this was my sophomore year, I got an internship with University Computing Services. That was pretty traditional IT work and sort of a preview of what a real job might look like after graduation, although it was IT, not programming at that point. I was to spend a semester working the help desk. It was kind of an interesting internship. A semester of doing that, a semester sitting in the computer room and pulling tapes from the tape library when the mainframe called for one, and then 2 semesters of doing some actual programming. So when I say sitting in the computer room, this is mainframe stuff. So there's a big room, even this recently, that was full of these absolutely enormous computers, physically large, refrigerator, room-sized things, and yeah, tapes, cassettes that held the data. Not cassettes that look like you would put in an ancient car radio, but same kind of magnetic tape inside, and that's still where an awful lot of data was. And the way it worked, one of their full-time programmers would be working on something, and they would need a piece of data. They would hit some button on their terminal, and something would start flashing in the computer room saying somebody needs tape whatever. You go hunt it down, and you stick it in a drive, and they can't do their work until you do it. So their computer operator is a job, and was a job for decades. There are fewer and fewer of them. But that's what those people do. Those people sit in front of these green screens all day. They probably have no idea how any of it works, but they just respond to these requests when they come in. And they have these, that's it. Gosh dang, that's still on the Wayback Machine. Yep. Oh gosh, designed and created by David E. Struess of Star Image Web Design. Whether you need a simple page or an entire corporate presence, Star Image has your solution. Awesome. So yeah. So I spent a semester in the help desk, a semester sitting in the computer room, and then it was summer. So the summer after my sophomore year, I got an internship with a big employer in my hometown. It paid really well, insanely well for a summer job for a college student, and it involved building web stuff for them. So I still got to kind of do what I like doing. And by then I had learned several programming languages, including a couple that were common on the server side, like Java. Not JavaScript, Java. I knew JavaScript too, but so I could build sites with persistent data and stuff, and databases. Office Space had just come out on video, and my fellow interns and I spent the whole summer talking about it as we were pretty much living it. If you're too young for Office Space, it's directed by the creator of Silicon Valley on HBO. Despite the overall nature of the organization, though, I was lucky to be working in a division that no one was paying much attention to besides my immediate supervisor. So I still got to do some cool stuff. So the fact that this organization almost seemed to exist to suck the life out of people didn't stop my internship from being kind of fun. If you can make it through life without having a traditional job and can just go straight to freelancing, I'm very happy for you. If you're determined to work for yourself but you can't pull it off just yet, I think your time with traditional employment will be well spent, even if your end goal is going out on your own. You will learn a ton about working with others, getting things done, even in situations where you have zero power. And more than that, it's pretty darn hard to truly learn without experiencing. For example, you'll develop empathy for the people who do have those jobs, because it's easy to be super judgy, just in general, but also of like corporate drones or whatever, which is most people. And if you've done it, then you know that, these are just people waiting for their paycheck like everybody else. And if you want clients as a freelancer, these are going to be your clients. So you don't want to have a low opinion of them. So it helps to experience what they've experienced, just so you know what it's like, and you have a much better idea of what their problems are, so that you can solve them better. So it's worth doing your time, even if you don't want to stay there forever. Yes, I made that sound like a jail sentence. So in the fall, I started the kind of relevant portion of my university internship. And I had an experience that I've learned is pretty common in internships. And I say this to a bunch of people who hope to have internships next summer. The full-timers who were supposed to supervise me were pretty annoyed that I was there. They didn't want an intern. Their bosses made them have an intern, because having an intern just created more work for them. I couldn't really do anything to help them. They just had to waste more of their time coming up with tasks for me to do where I couldn't really hurt anything. Because we're talking about student systems that affect grades and financial aid and all this stuff. What are they going to have this college student do, really? So the most important thing was that they kept me from doing anything that could actually have any real effect. So they just gave me busy work. They were visibly annoyed. This dude did a terrible job of hiding his annoyance at my very presence, even though I knew it wasn't personal. So I did what I tended to do in those days. I quit. And newly emboldened by having had semi-real job experience at my summer internship and my university internship, and knowing some programming languages, I doubled down on the freelancing. I'd run out of ideas for finding clients myself, so I teamed up with my cousin in Illinois, and we started in Illinois. Did I say Illinois? Holy crap. In Illinois, that's because I was thinking of S Corp, which is the next thing I'm going to say. So with my cousin in Illinois, I started an S Corp. It was like a real company. We had ink in our name. Web Magna, because guess what? It wasn't taken. We even had a lawyer. Speaking of which, our lawyer didn't have a website. So guess what we did? That's right. And my cousin found me quite a few gigs. And at this point, I really, really wanted to drop out of college and move to Illinois and do this full time. My parents literally bribed me to stay in school. They agreed to pay my room and board if I would finish school. This was midway through my junior year. I didn't have that much. But man, I just really wanted to get out there and start doing work. And you hear all the stories, so-and-so didn't have, Bill Gates never graduated. The people weren't talking about Zuckerberg yet. I don't even know if he was in college yet, much less dropping out. That was probably a good thing that they bribed me to stay in, because my cousin was also a full-time realtor and had decided to become a full-time law student as well as being my business partner. So he didn't have a whole lot of time to find work for me anymore. But I kept the corporation alive and did a little bit of freelancing on the side for many years. But it would be a while before it would be my full-time job again, because I was just terrible at the sales part. And honestly, I needed more experience before I could really say to someone, yes, I can solve your problem. Because while I could maybe make something that works, I just hadn't built enough stuff to really, truly know what I was doing. even though I thought I did. So I graduated in 2002, and I got a job for a tiny, tiny company. When I started, there was one senior developer and maybe two junior developers working there, as well as the business owner and a receptionist. So I started with the title straight out of college of senior developer. Why? Because I had a computer science degree, so therefore I was the senior developer. This was a little scary, the way this place operated. And within a month, I was the only developer. One person got quit. One person got quit. One person quit. Another person got quit involuntarily. Another person started and got fired in that same first month. There was more than 100% turnover in my first month there. I didn't necessarily get the picture of stability out of this place. And plus, after 6 months, I just decided it wasn't for me. And I had a tendency at this age not to stick with things. So guess what I did? I quit. And I started working for a for-profit college. One of those places you see advertised on TV. Not a great institution of higher learning. But it was kind of fun. But it was part-time and pretty frustrating because the students weren't all hard workers guys. These were people who, they were only in college because there was some place who wanted their money bad enough that they would let anybody in, no matter how lazy they were. This school had a policy because, like, if their attendance was poor, they risked losing their accreditation. They wouldn't get as much money. So we were supposed to call their parents if they missed class. Call their parents. This is illegal now, but I don't think FERPA existed then. Anyway, it was not the greatest. So I got a couple of job offers, and I took one of them. That turned out to be a bad fit, and let's just say they reached that conclusion before I had a chance to quit. So yeah, that happened. But I got another job. For those of you keeping track, that is 4 jobs before I had been out of college for a year. I maybe didn't have it all figured out just yet. And that's not counting my own business as one of the 4. But hey, that last one that I got the first year out of college lasted for a while. I stayed there for 7 years. For those of you doing 9 minus 3 and saying, that's 6. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 7, guys. The first one counts. Anyway. It actually depends on when during the year. Like if I started in April and quit in April, then yeah, it was only 6 years. But that's not what happened. Anyway. So I stayed at that job for quite a while, and I did a tiny bit of freelancing on the side throughout that gig. But I had a real job that I mostly liked. And a few years into it, 4 years into it, it was kind of an interesting job. I was actually the only programmer at the company. It was a company of 40 to 50 people. At one point, 10% of the company was named Dave. There were 4 out of 40 of us. But guess who was the last Dave standing? That's right. All those other jokers couldn't cut it. That was a job that made me appreciate the fact that I wasn't in sales full time, because holy crap, do salespeople get fired a lot. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. So yeah, if stability is what you're into, maybe don't go into sales. But it was an IT company. It was an IT outsourcing company, sort of, and a co-location facility, a data center. So row after row of racks full of servers and switches and routers and other networking gear. And their bread and butter was people just renting the space, and then especially what would come to be known as cloud stuff. No one was calling it the cloud yet. They were by the time I left there. But so they would manage people's servers for them, like manage the operating system updates, make some of the system configuration changes. They would worry about all the network infrastructure stuff, like if they didn't have people on staff who could deal with configuring routers and switches. I'm not talking routers like you have in your home. The ones that actually do routing, the ones you use at your home, they're mostly firewalls and DHCP servers, but and switches. But anyway, so that's mostly what they did. But they hired me for a little venture that the VP of sales got this crazy idea. That like, hey, yeah, it's cool charging people like $30,000 a month to rent some servers, but what if we got into the business of $10 a month web hosting? You would have to have some serious volume to make any money that amounted to anything, and that was a very, very crowded market. But he wanted to do it, and they could do it cheaply.
$20 a month for basic plan, 200 megs.
Oh, that was like the hosting you would get if we built your site. So this isn't the job I'm talking about. Yeah, but that was like I hated doing the hosting stuff, but like if you were a freelance web designer in those days, you needed to do hosting too because like it had to live somewhere. So you may as well make an extra $5 a month off of it. No, I was a reseller. So anyway, and then this thing that I was working for also had a reseller program. So anyway, they were going to do this venture, and they posted a job looking for someone who knew PHP and MySQL, which I did. So I applied for this because I'd just gotten fired the day before. And I got the interview right away, and I went in and had this interview where they asked me a bunch of technical questions about things like DNS and stuff. That's the only one I remember. They're like, do you know what DNS is? And I said, yeah. They're like, how does it work? And it's like, I told very briefly, like basically just, translates IP addresses to domain names or vice versa. I mean, I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll let you know sometime next week. I had been gone for like 5 minutes. I wasn't even home yet when they called and offered me the job. Maybe this should have been a red flag. But remember, I stayed here 7 years. So I took the job. I got there. It turns out what they wanted me to do is this. So they had this new web hosting venture, dirt cheap web hosting, as opposed to the $30,000 a month hosting that they were already doing. They wanted me. I had two network cables coming into my cubicle. One of them was on one. Crap! Why am I forgetting the name? A Class C, one Class C IP address. That's like the second number in an IP address, and another one coming from a totally different one. So they looked like totally different regions, because this was an internet backbone provider. And then what I would do is I'd get on the one, I'd go to some web forums for programmers, for people who knew PHP and MySQL. Not because I was using PHP and MySQL in my job, mind you, but so that I could go to these things and be active participants in these communities, and then establish a reputation, and then log into my other computer on a totally different Class C network and be like, hey guys, anybody know like a super rad web hosting company for PHP developers? And I'd be like, yeah, dog, you got to try Puma web hosting. So this is what I was supposed to be doing. AstroTurfing, as it's known. Fake grassroots. That sucked. Fortunately, it took like 2 months for the powers that be to decide this whole venture was a terrible idea. So fortunately, they didn't can me when they did that. They're like, I don't know, like you can fix people's printers or something when their printers are broken. So I became just the generic LAN support guy, but I still had a job. And a few months later, this company merged with another company. They bought a consultancy so that they could get into this managed services business, because they were a backbone internet provider. Like they sold T1s to businesses and stuff, and they had all this co-location space with the racks and racks of servers. But they weren't managing the networking equipment for businesses yet. So they bought this other company and started to do that. And so I got a new boss who was in charge of that division. And, he just asked me like for my resume so he could find something for me to do. Like, okay, so what are you actually capable of? What could we use you for? I was like, here I am. He's like, okay, you have a pulse, you can be on call, which was awful. 'Cause I didn't actually know how to do any of the stuff, so I was just another middleman getting awakened in the middle of the night. But I was still the guy who fixed people's printers. And they didn't have any kind of trouble ticket system or anything. So I wrote one real quick just for myself to use. And my boss saw it and thought, well, that's cool. You can do that? Well, this place had a 24/7 call center. And they had no trouble ticket system whatsoever. They were keeping track of issues in plain text files. There was no way to search for it. It was an awful, awful system. So like, yeah, make something for the knock. And I was like, okay. So suddenly I was a developer again. And pretty soon I wasn't fixing people's printers. That became my full-time job. And they liked my trouble ticket system so much that they just kept asking for more and more features. And then they were like, well, hey, now that we're managing all these devices and we have just rack after rack of servers, we have no system for keeping track of which slot in which cabinet any given server is. Could you build us a device management system? I was like, yeah, sure. So I was a lone coder doing this stuff. And so I was at the stage where I could make things work. The stuff, my code in retrospect looked like crap, but stuff worked. And I wasn't hanging around any other developers, so it was up to me to grow. I only got better if I was determined to get better. Otherwise, I could just coast because I had no one else kind of holding me accountable because no one else could look at my code and make any sense of it whatsoever because there were no programmers in the place. But it was still kind of fun. Well, after 4 years, I finally talked them into letting me hire someone to help me. And a friend of mine recommended someone, and I interviewed him and a bunch of other people. He was by far the best candidate. His name was Miles. So he and I rewrote the whole system from scratch because by this point the feature requests had just gotten completely out of hand. And the fact that I had written spaghetti code that was unmaintainable was starting to become a problem. And they were cool with it. They were cool with starting over from scratch. And we rewrote the whole thing pretty fast, much better, with automated tests and stuff. And it was a lot of fun. And we got a lot done despite the fact that it was very easy for this guy and I to spend all day talking about music because as it turns out we had everything under the sun in common, including our birth date. So we did that for about 3 years together. And then in 2009, I was still enjoying it, but I reached a point where probably I had done all I was going to be able to do there. Plus, I was getting married to someone who lived in Bloomington, and this was in Carmel. So I got a job as an enterprise software manager, and I was absolutely miserable. So right before I left, Miles and I hired this other guy, also named Dave, to sort of not exactly take my place, sort of maybe take Miles' place, and Miles took my place. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, so it ended up being Miles and Dave still, but it was a different Dave. And that guy stayed there for a really long time. But forever, everyone called him Dave Jones all the time. They never just called him Dave, because I was Dave. So, 5 years after I left, I was still, I guess 3 years, because it was only 3 years that I was gone. He never became anything shorter than Dave Jones. Because, there can be only one, right? So I left, and I took a job as an enterprise software manager, and I was absolutely miserable. I have no shortage of stories about this job. I will spare you. I will say, however, that I learned a lot in my 3 years in enterprise software. I saw how some of those big organizations run, the good and the bad, because there were good things, in addition to horrifying things. So I learned a lot of what not to do and how not to manage a project, as well as how to do things like change management. In other words, so you update a system that's already in production. So you have to update production with your new code. There are safe ways of doing that, and there are very dangerous ways of doing that. You should probably not do it in the middle of the day when everyone's using it. And you should probably not just log into that server and copy your code over. You need to have some systems in place. In fact, it shouldn't even be the developer who does that in a perfect world. So I learned, a lot of that stuff that's actually pretty valuable. But anyway, at the end of this run in 2013, Miles was, I learned this story last night. I didn't even know this part. He was sitting in a conference, and I guess he had quit the other job and gone freelancing about 1.5 years earlier, leaving poor other Dave by himself there. And he was sitting in this conference, and the speaker was talking about like figuring out how you work best. Do you work best alone? Do you work best as part of a team? And he had been working solo for a while and thought it was fine, but then realized, this really, who am I kidding? This isn't how I work best. So like in the middle of that talk, he texted me and he was like, so I was thinking maybe you and I should start. Yes, for the love of God, please, let's start something. Get me out of here. So I gave notice the next day. I didn't take much convincing to go back out on my own. So we started a company called Fretless, and it's what I still do. So what we do every day is talk to yahoos like you. Sometimes. But really, we're an agency or we're freelancers or we're consultants or whatever you want to call us, because it kind of depends on the specific project. But sometimes people bring us in because they have an app they want to build and they don't have necessarily the technical expertise to build it, but they have the idea. So we build it for them from scratch. More often, there's a company that already has a software team. They've been building things for years. They have a lot of experience, but they have a deadline that it looks like they're not going to meet. And they just need more people. So we come in for a few months or whatever and help them do that. Or they can't find any really experienced developers to hire, but they have a lot of inexperienced developers. So they need a more senior developer to come in and help mentor, increase the productivity, but also just mentor the younger developers or the less experienced developers, and do stuff like that. So that's a lot of what we do too. And then every once in a while, like we teach a class, especially the two of us. And that's our job. And it's a lot of fun. Oh, by the way, we started Fretless, and like 3 months later, we stole Dave from our old employer. So now he works with us too. So yeah, Dave Jones. So we just go around stealing him from whoever he works for. That's just it's kind of our mission. So that's that's the Fretless story, the very, very long version. But part of why Miles and I wanted to do this is one of my very first slides, I talked about freedom, and I talked about the freedom to choose your projects, but also the freedom to choose your approach. Because a lot of times in traditional jobs, you have deadlines that are nearly impossible to meet. So it is all you can do to just make it work. Maybe if you're lucky, you have time to make it work well, but you probably don't have time to make it to your satisfaction. It's hard to put the focus on quality when you just have to keep pumping out more features, especially if there are if it's a sales-driven organization where what they do is they go talk to potential customers and they're like, well, yeah, I'd buy your thing if it did this. Like, oh, it can do, in 90 days, it'll be able to do that. So, hey, developers, how long would this take? 6 months. Okay, you have 90 days, go. I wish I were making this up. I really, really do. So if you're in that kind of situation, you don't really have time to write good software. You have time to throw something together that maybe meets the minimum requirements, and maybe that's your entire job forever, and that's really, really unsatisfying, especially if you're the kind of person who, and not, some people would be satisfied with that, with just like, you get crap done, you move on. But we're the sorts of weirdos who like treat programming like a craft and really take pride in doing things right and making code that can be read later. Because remember, you write code once, but people are going to read it a whole lot more than that. And not only is it easier for the other developers on your team to figure out what the heck you were doing. I don't know. You're all just starting out, but have you ever had the experience already where, like, you write something, you look at it a month later, and you have no idea what the crap you were doing? So remember, the other developer you screw over by writing unreadable code may be you. So don't do it. And it's nice to be able to write tests for your software, write automated tests. That helps you. I have a whole presentation about software testing, but that we don't have time for. But some of the stuff is obvious, just to prove that it works, right? But another thing is to prove that it still works as you keep adding additional features. Because, again, you're just starting out, but who's had the experience of you've got something working, now you add a new feature, now that thing doesn't work anymore. You break the stuff that's already there. So automated tests can help you find those things. Because, once you're in the like tens of thousands of lines of code, like going through and making sure all those things work every time is impossible. Maybe if you work for a Salesforce, you actually have a dedicated testing team that can go through and click all the buttons. But you need some automated tests that can catch stuff so that when you break something, you at least know that you broke it and you can go fix it. And a lot of times, writing tests forces you to think harder about the way you design your solution so that you make it a lot more robust in the first place, just because it forces you to slow down and actually think about how it works and catch more edge cases. So like maybe it works as long as they don't type a number in there, but then the whole thing explodes. Well, that's not what you want to happen if they type invalid input. You want to deal with that. And so your test can also help you catch that kind of thing. But we worked at places where there was never any time to test. So like now we can do that. We can just tell people this is our approach. This is how we do it. This is why we do it. It will save you money in the long run versus rushing things out. And if they're not cool with that, we just don't take that job, which again is a luxury if you have enough work to go around. But we've been fortunate so far that that is the case, and so we can choose to work places that actually appreciate that kind of approach. So that's another reason why we did it, and also like since we're the bosses, we also get to choose who we hire. So even if you're a manager, sometimes hiring is really hard, by the way. Just in case you're ever in that position, hiring developers is super hard, and no one has any idea how they're doing it. If you Google like how to hire developers, you will get some terrible freaking advice. That's how you end up with jerks like Seth, right? But we've had pretty good luck doing it, but we're still very, very small. Part of how we do that and part of how we find work and part of how we grew, so I left this part of the story out, and it was even my notes, I think. Shortly after Miles started at InFrame in like 2006 or 2007, Ruby on Rails was brand new, and we wanted to switch to using Ruby instead of PHP. So we switched to that, and it was really, really new. And we found out that Miles found out that there was a local meetup for Ruby developers. So we started going to that. Meetup.com was also brand spanking new. So we started going to that, and like I never would have gone to that on my own. Miles is a lot more outgoing than I am. Believe it or not, I'm not super outgoing. Like this is performance. I'm comfortable performing, as my happy birthday song might suggest. But that's different from like talking to people. So yeah, I have a little bit of social anxiety about that kind of stuff. And I always, I always feel like, I don't know, like a booger's hanging out of my nose, or just that they're thinking. And even when I'm teaching, there's a very good chance you're all thinking, "Gosh, is he ever going to shut up?" Anyway, I'm just real uncomfortable in those situations. I'm always afraid everyone's going to think I suck at everything. So I was afraid to go to networking events like this. Or it wasn't a networking event. It was just a meetup of programmers. So Miles forced me to go. Well, he didn't force me. He told me, and I was real excited about the idea, because then I got to go with someone I know. So like there was someone I could fall back to. Like if no one else would talk to me, I could just go stand next to him while he talked to other people. And they could be like, "Oh, well, gosh, he's in close proximity to this guy. He must be cool too. This is still basically how Fretless operates, by the way. There's Miles, and then there's that creepy bald guy who's always standing next to him. So we started going to this meetup, and it was like, oh my gosh, these are my people. These people exist. Remember, I worked at this place for 7 years with no other programmers, or 4 years with no other programmers, and then just Miles. And oh my gosh, it was great. Because another thing I had experienced a little bit, I was kind of maybe other programmers tend to be jerks, and it was just unfortunate that I had been around the wrong people. Ruby, as a programming language, has a motto: Mats is nice, so we are nice. Mats is the guy who wrote Ruby. Now, on the other hand, Ruby on Rails, when Ruby actually became popular about 10 years into its life, was written by a guy named, well, David, of course, because everyone's named David. David Heinemeier Hansen, who wrote it when he was like 22, maybe 23, and young and real freaking cocky, and kind of a jerk at the time. So I'd actually met him, and like, oh my gosh, he was so arrogant. And so this is like, and so I went to this event. Like, who's used Basecamp? Anybody use Basecamp? No, really? Okay. Well, anyway, Basecamp's a thing. It's a project management tool written by a company in Chicago, and he wrote Ruby on Rails for them as a contractor so that they could build this product. And then he became like the retroactive co-founder of the company. But right after they built it, they had this workshop at their office called the Building of Basecamp that was just like about how they did it. And it was like super inspirational. It was great. And this was one of those networking events of sorts. Like, nobody else would talk to me. Like the guy, I kind of got the impression that everyone else already knew each other. And he was this joker from Indiana. Like, I was sitting next to a guy. I asked him, well, you know, who he worked for or what his job was or whatever, and he told me. And I had heard of them, and I was really impressed with their work. And I said something like that, and this was his reaction. like so you can see how I developed this anxiety. So anyway, you know, going to this meetup, I was around all these like-minded Daves. Let me tell you about the people who were at that first Ruby meetup. It was Dave Woodward. There was Dave Christiansen. There was Dave Baldwin. There was Dave Jones, whom I didn't know yet. There was me, and there was Miles, and there were like 3 other people. It was all Daves. It was ridiculous. All those Daves were there at that very first meeting. But like everyone was there, like cared about writing software and wanted to get better and like wanted to hang out with other programmers because we can all learn from each other. You know, talking to other people about how they solve a problem is a really great way to get better at stuff. And like pair programming, working with somebody else, where just like maybe one of you's talking, but you're both talking through the solutions, and you trade places every once in a while. It's a great way to do it because even if you're, even if you think you know more than the other person, I guarantee they have something to teach you. And it's good to get used to being humble because, again, like I said, this will never stop happening where you don't know how to do what you're about to do. It's impossible to learn it all. Because once you do, guess what? The new thing's going to come out, and that thing isn't going to be cool anymore.